Hello fellow collectors, I hope you are doing very well indeed. Today I continue my monthly series where I talk about the best films I watched in the preceding month. And here we are, already with the first of these videos of the new year. January was an exceptional month of films for me. I've definitely started the year strong. I've been trying to make a bigger effort to tackle my watch pile, and so I've been dipping into some titles that have been sat on my shelves for far too long, as well as of course meandering around the rest too, so it's led to it being a wonderfully varied month of films for me. And so, without any further ado, let's talk about the best films I watched in January. First up is France. From 2016 and directed by François Ozon, it stars the exquisite Paula Beer, as well as Pierre Nini, Ernst Stolzner, Marie Gruber and Johann von Bülow. This is an anti-war film, all about the painful aftermath, consequences and heavy consciences that people had to live with after World War I, and the lingering resentment, particularly here between Germany and France, in the years that followed. I think this film asks the question, is there really any victory in war? Surely there is only loss on every side. Though a war might come to an end, its consequences, of course, linger on. Paula Beer, who is fast becoming one of my favourite actors, gives an absolutely incredible performance here. She carries the film effortlessly and really holds the emotional heart of the story. She is quiet, tender, sad and mournful, but conveys so well those rare moments of uplift where she gets her head above the tough emotions for just a moment and enjoys those small glimpses of peace and happiness. I thought this film did a particularly excellent job here in showing that there are two sides to things. Though for the most part it's set in Germany, it in no way shied away from portraying a more rounded view of war. There is a particularly incredible monologue by the main German father, played brilliantly by Ernst Stolzner. Some men are gathered around a table and talking about how they blame the French for their sons' deaths, and he says about all of their sons, who sent them to the front? Who furnished their ammunition and weapons? We did, their fathers. And he continues on, though I won't quote the whole passage to not spoil it for anyone, but it's safe to say that this is one of the most powerful and poignant pieces of dialogue I've ever heard in a film about war. It actually reminded me a lot of the quote by Nelson Mandela that says, "Resentment is like drinking poison and then hoping it will kill your enemies." And that's really the crux of this film. It shows us and teaches us empathy, and does so expertly. It was also wonderfully shot, mixing both black and white and colour here in a really interesting way. Overall, a stunning and very moving film with a powerful ending as well. Next we have The Pumpkin Eater, a film from 1964 and directed by Jack Clayton. It stars Anne Bancroft, Peter Finch, as well as James Mason and Maggie Smith. Though this film long predates them both, I'd say that if Eraserhead and A Marriage Story had a child, it would be this film, perhaps with Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf as a cousin. This is a story about family, marriage and children, but not seen through any sort of rosy glasses. It's a harsh story, perhaps a more realistic story in many ways to what we often see portrayed on screen, where the difficulties, arguments, loneliness, depression and struggles within the context of a marriage are all put on display for us to see here. The story focuses in particular on Anne Bancroft's character, Jo, and her perspective, and also very much reflects and shows no doubt the experience of many women in marriage at that time in the 60s, with the novel that this film is based on being released just a couple years earlier in 1962. So, Jo meets Peter Finch's character called Jake, and they end up getting married, which for Jo is her third marriage, and so she comes into the marriage with a lot of children already. The film early on gives us these images of families with lots of kids, happy husband and wife, showing the joy of togetherness, love and chaos, but that sort of chaotic peace and fulfillment that comes with having lots of kids about and being happy and playful. But of course that's all juxtaposed to the other parts of the film where we see Jo in many moments on her own, mournful, maybe drinking, with these long shots that focus on her boredom, depression and loneliness. This film is not a straightforward one, as marriage I'm sure isn't so straightforward either. There are moments of bickering, but then moments of passionate love, moments of anger and fighting, and then moments of reconciliation. In one scene you think they will surely divorce, and in another you think of course they will make things work. It's a story of ups and downs, and a bit difficult to go much more into depth without spoiling things, so I'll just say that this was an astonishing film, with moments that are heartbreaking. It's got some excellent commentary and questions on women's roles in family and childbearing, particularly in the 60s, though undoubtedly still relevant in many ways today. It's got a lot to say, of course, about marriage and what we will put up with, what should we forgive, and what will we accept for the sake of our children. There's also a lot to do with mental health and emotional breakdown too. I know this one might sound like a bit of a dire time, but I'll just say that this was sat on my shelf for far too long, and I wish I had gotten to it sooner because it was exceptional and very thought-provoking. Brilliantly directed by Clayton and featuring amazing performances by both Bancroft and Finch. This one is so worth your time if you haven't seen it yet. Next we have Camera Buff, a film from 1979 directed by the legendary Krzysztof Kieslowski and starring Jerzy Stuhr, who also worked with him on several other projects including Decalogue and Three Colours White, and also starring Margot Rosata-Zabkowska, Eva Pokus, Stefan Chweski and Jerzy Novak, among many others. The film follows the story of a man about to become a new father, and so decides to buy a film camera so he can film his baby as they grow up. His factory workplace discover this and ask him to film an upcoming work celebration, which at first he is reluctant to do, and the story goes from there. This one is all about the all-consuming nature of a passion. It's about how interests can capture our heart and change who we are. We often think for the better, though others might certainly disagree. I think this was a very personal film for Kieslowski, perhaps even more so than his other more famous ones. There's a lot of focus on challenges to overcome in filmmaking, particularly the barriers and critiques from the communist framework and state censorship, for example, that he no doubt had to contend with a great deal, while at the same time trying to make films that are worthwhile, that correspond to a vision. Undoubtedly a tough line to walk. As our protagonist Philip starts to get more and more excited and consumed by filmmaking, you can even see in some of his most painful, personal and intimate moments we are shown that he is still thinking about how that might look if it was filmed on camera. We see others warning him who see the difference in him and his personality and see the path that he's taking, which of course is affecting other areas of his life, both personally and professionally. This is all deftly handled, as you can see him comprehending and yet not understanding. There is almost this inexorable pull now in effect, almost seemingly beyond his control. There is also some fantastic discussion on art and truth, in particular one scene involving the head of the factory, who is, of course, more in tune with the communist state apparatus. But it was wonderful to hear that discussion around art, nature, hidden agendas and the unspoken, bringing into question objectivity, for example. Overall, this one really resonated with me quite deeply. It was superb and another phenomenal film from Kieslowski. Next we have Rice Boy Sleeps. From 2022 and directed by Anthony Shim, this one stars Choi Sung-yoon, Ethan Hwang and Do-yoon No Hwang. This film was deeply moving. In my unboxing of this, I said I thought it would probably be one I'd talk about more in one of these videos, and I was definitely right. I'd heard some wonderful things about this one and can happily say they were spot on. This is a bittersweet story set in the 90s about a woman who battles through one hardship after another. She ends up alone with a young son and decides to travel to Canada from South Korea to start a new life, which is anything but easy for her. The experiences for her son as he grows up in a different culture of course shape him and his relationships, as well as his relationship with his mother, a kind of one foot in each culture as he struggles with this sense of belonging, I think evidenced quite clearly by his choice of hairstyle and contact lenses. He learns quickly at a young age the difficulties associated with not fitting in and being different, enhanced by the cruelty of children. And these of course later become embroiled with the difficulties of adolescence and puberty as he becomes a young man. There is a fairly sombre tone to the film as a whole, and it has more than a couple heartbreaking moments that, unless you are made of stone, will hit you pretty hard. But there's also a lot of sweetness here too. There's so much meaning, deep emotion and gravitas to such seemingly little things, like the tender moments when his mother watches over him as he sleeps, both as a child and as a teenager. Though so much has changed and she is aged, her love for her son has never changed a bit. The thread of wanting a better life for your children runs throughout this, despite the difficulties it might bring to you. At her workplace in a factory, there are several scenes where her friends are mostly other immigrants from various places. They all stick together, encourage one another, laugh together as they're all in the same boat of having travelled and uprooted for the hope of a better tomorrow for themselves and their families. There's a lot more to be said about this one, but again, I don't want to spoil the story, so I'll just say that it's a film that asks us questions about identity, home and culture, and shows us the importance of family and love within that. Next, we have the silent film masterpiece Metropolis, directed by the legendary Fritz Lang. It's from 1927 and stars Brigitte Helm, Gustav Frolich, Alfred Abel and Rudolf Klein-Rogge, among a host of others, including one of the biggest uses of extras I've ever seen in a film. During my recent trip to Berlin last October, I was lucky enough to visit the Deutsche Cinemathek, their film museum, and I picked up both a t-shirt for Metropolis as well as the Eureka Blu-ray. It's one that's been on my list to watch for a while, but wearing the shirt recently has been a constant reminder that I had to watch it soon. And my goodness, this was simply astonishing. Perhaps the word masterpiece is thrown around too much these days, but I think it's undeniable that this was the masterpiece and pinnacle of the silent era and what it was capable of. For a film released in 1927, it is simply mind-blowing, and there are so many shots here where I was amazed and had no idea how they could possibly have managed it back then. I just kept thinking throughout that this is a true work of art. The set design, costuming, props and set pieces here are still to be marvelled at almost 100 years later, with some incredible scenes and spectacles. The story at its core is something we've now seen many times over and are fairly familiar with the careless elites, overly wealthy and with too much power, exerting their influence uncaringly on the working classes, those responsible for keeping the city together and running. Something that sadly couldn't be more relevant in today's world if it tried to be, which, if you ask me, is a bit of a sad reflection on our societal progression over the course of the last 100 years. Furthermore, with regards to relevancy today, I think this speaks directly to the possibility and potential of AI and the havoc it has the potential to cause. I would assume in 1920s Germany it was more a comment perhaps on machines in general, but that added sci-fi element gives us an even more lasting relevancy. There's also a lot of interesting biblical allegory throughout this, the most obvious of which comes from the Tower of Babel story, where the central skyscraper takes its name from in the city of Metropolis. A story about the hubris of man, our potential, but I think brings into question our motivations, arrogance and ego. And just as a quick aside while on the subject, I can highly recommend Ted Chiang's book, A Story of Your Life and Others, which is a collection of his short stories, including the one that the film Arrival is based on. And the book begins with a story based off the Tower of Babel, which was incredible. So if you're looking for something to read, I can't recommend that more highly. But the story and its influence on Metropolis I thought was very interesting indeed, along with a lot of other biblical references as well. This film is a spectacle to behold. It is mesmerising and engrossing. It is enormous in scale and scope and pulls off everything it attempts to in superb form. Absolutely incredible stuff. Up next, we go from a huge film to a very small one, about some small people. It's Petite Maman, a film from 2021, written and directed by Céline Sciamma, and starring Josephine and Gabrielle Sanz, Nina Murice, and Stéphane Varupin, and Margot Abascal. To steal the title of a film by Barry Jenkins, watching this one was like medicine for my melancholy. I put this one on because it was short, with a runtime of only about 72 minutes. I was feeling pretty down and dejected and just didn't have the capacity to focus on anything much longer. And what a transformative experience watching this glorious film was. I wrote a little review on Letterboxd and I said I needed to see this like I need to breathe. Watching this film restored my faith in the magic, goodness and wonder in the world. There is such a lightness, sweetness and tender heart to this story. where the beauty and childlike innocence and acceptance overflows from every scene, and it just made my heart happy when I sorely needed it. It has a fairy tale-like quality to it, where the past and the present are able to meet and converse and share together. The two little girls, of course incredibly cute, bring such a wonderful life to this story and give great performances, undoubtedly due to the excellent direction of Celine Sciamma. There's an excellent video clip where Ethan Hawke talks about art being sustenance, and that we don't often think about things like poetry, for example, until we go through tragedy. Or perhaps the opposite, maybe we fall in love and can't contain our joy. And all of a sudden we seek to understand and make sense of these emotions. And that's when art is not a luxury, it's sustenance. I love that clip so much and think it's such an incredible take, and it sort of perfectly sums this film up for me, because this is what I needed that day. This is the art that sustained me. And last but not least, we have a few honourable mentions. First up is Ninja Baby, which I considered talking about more because I thoroughly enjoyed this one, but I didn't want to make the video overly long, so I'll just say that this film had a lot of elements that I love. It's an indie drama about a 20-something comic book artist who finds out she's 6 months pregnant, and the whirlwind of emotions and life changes that she goes through as a result. This one mixes animation into the live action, and it's funny, crazy, and just a brilliant Norwegian film directed by Ingvild Svei Flicker and starring Christine Kuja Thorpe, who is absolutely fantastic. And it actually started me on a journey to watch Thorpe's other films as well, 2 of which I've now seen, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing The Promised Land, which stars Hair and Mads Mikkelsen when it releases here in a few weeks' time. Next is Red Sun, a title from Radiance Films that I know a lot of people didn't like, but I actually really enjoyed it and found interesting the whole superficiality of it. Next is The Worst Person in the World, which is a film that I didn't connect with all that much on my first viewing, but just recently it had been on my mind and I really wanted to see it again. And I guess I'm just in a season in my life where I was able to connect this time because, my goodness, I thought it was utterly brilliant and very moving. And then we have The Holdovers, which I saw in a cinema. And it did something I'm not really sure any film has ever done before, where I shed a couple tears. One because I was laughing so hard, and the other because I was so deeply moved. For someone who's not really a Christmas film person, I think I've finally found one I'll happily rewatch each Christmas from now on. And well, that brings us to the end of the video and my January in film. An absolutely incredible start to my year film-wise, one which I can only hope continues. I hope your year has also started wonderfully well, and I hope you also watched some excellent films in January. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.